In the dead of night, 12 bandits raid a lonely Montana ranch. Thinking they've found easy prey, they're dead wrong. The old rancher they're robbing isn't just some weathered farmer. He's the deadliest gunslinger in American history. A man who's put 97 men in the ground, each with a single shot between the eyes. They say he could draw and fire before a man's heart could beat twice. For 20 years, James Hawkins has lived quietly, trying to forget the rivers of blood in his wake. But tonight, as the Raven Creek gang threatens everything he's built, they're about to learn why grown men still whisper his name in terror. What follows isn't just a story of vengeance, it's a brutal reminder that some legends are written in blood for a reason. And Death's shadow is about to paint his masterpiece. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of gold as James Hawkins walked his fence line, checking for breaks after the spring thaw. His weathered hands, calloused from 20 years of ranch work, moved methodically along the wire. At 62, he still moved with a fluid grace that belied his age, though few noticed the predatory smoothness in his gait. His ranch sat nestled in a small valley, 10 miles from the nearest neighbor. 200 acres of good grazing land, a sturdy barn, and a 2-story farmhouse he'd built with his own hands. Everything a man could want for a peaceful retirement. Everything he'd dreamed of during those blood-soaked years when peace seemed impossible. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair as he paused, head tilting slightly. Most wouldn't have noticed the sound, the faint crunch of hooves on frozen grass, still too far away to see. But old habits died hard, and the habits that had kept him alive through 97 gunfights died hardest of all. Sheriff Mills appeared over the rise, his young deputy trailing behind. The sheriff's expression was grim, his normally cheerful face lined with worry. James counted 4 more riders behind them, ranchers from deeper in the valley, men he knew by sight if not close friendship. They wouldn't be riding out this early unless something was wrong. "Morning, James," Mills called out, reining his horse to a stop. "Hope we're not disturbing your morning rounds." James noted how the deputy's hand stayed close to his gun, how the young man's eyes kept darting to James's own weapon, a simple work pistol, nothing fancy. Nothing like the custom Colt he'd retired along with his former life. "Not at all, Sheriff. Coffee's hot if you'd care to explain what brings 6 men to my door at sunrise." The sheriff dismounted, his movements careful, not afraid exactly, but cautious, like a man approaching a sleeping bear. "Raven Creek gang hit the Morrison place last night, took everything they could carry, shot 3 hands who tried to stop them." James's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A coldness crept in, like winter frost spreading across a window pane. "The hands, they make it. 2 will pull through. Young Tommy Morrison wasn't so lucky. 17 years. Old died protecting his father's horses." The ranchers shifted uncomfortably as silence fell. They'd all heard the rumors about James Hawkins, whispers about who he'd been before buying the ranch, stories that seemed too bloody to be true. But something in his stillness now made those impossible stories suddenly seem very real. "Gangs. Been hitting farms all across the territory," Mills continued. "Working their way north. Word is they're 30 strong now, led by a man called Blackjack Harper." James's hand twitched slightly at the name. If anyone had been watching closely, they'd have seen his fingers move in that old familiar pattern. The quick-draw motion he'd practiced 10,000 times until it was faster than thought. "I know you like to keep to yourself, James," Mills said carefully, "but you've got the biggest spread in this part of the valley. Likely they'll hit you soon. Thought you should be warned." "Appreciate the courtesy, Sheriff." James's voice was quiet, measured. The voice of a man who'd learned that soft words could be deadlier than shouts. "But I reckon I can handle a few thieves," the deputy snorted. No disrespect, Mr. Hawkins, but these aren't just thieves, they're killers. Mean ones. Word is, Blackjack himself shot a marshal in Wyoming last month. Shot him while the man was on his knees, begging for his life. James turned to study the young deputy, and something in his gaze made the man fall silent. For just a moment, the carefully constructed facade of the simple rancher cracked, and everyone present caught a glimpse of something else, something that made their spines turn to ice. "Son," James said softly, "I know exactly what Blackjack Harper is, and if he's smart, he'll ride right on past my land. For his sake, I truly hope he's smart." The sheriff cleared his throat. "We're putting together a posse. Could use a good man like you." James turned back to his fence work, his movements deliberate. "I appreciate the offer, Sheriff, but those days are behind me. I'm just a rancher now, nothing more." The visitors left soon after, their coffee untouched. As their horses disappeared over the rise, James stood motionless, staring at the horizon. His right hand moved unconsciously, fingers twitching in that old familiar pattern. Draw, aim, fire, draw, aim, fire. Behind a loose board in his barn, wrapped in oiled cloth, his custom Colt lay waiting. 20 years of dust covered its pearl, handle and silver inlays. 20 years since it had last tasted blood. 20 years of peace purchased with a lifetime of violence. James Hawkins, the man they'd once called Death's Shadow, turned back to mending his fences, but his eyes kept drifting to the barn, to that hidden board, to the weight of old ghosts and older sins. Blackjack Harper was coming, and with him, all the blood and death and violence James had tried so hard to leave behind. The only question was whether he could stop what was coming without becoming the man he used to be, the man whose name still made hardened killers wake up screaming. James sat in his kitchen that evening, cleaning his work pistol by lamplight. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, each motion precise. The same way he'd cleaned his guns in Dodge City, in Tombstone, in all the blood-soaked towns that had made his legend. The memory came unbidden, sharp as a knife. Laramie, 1853. 7 men in black dusters, thinking numbers would save them. The feel of his Colt's pearl grip, smooth as silk. The way time seemed to slow when he drew, like God himself was holding his breath. 7 shots, 7 bodies. Not one had cleared leather. His hands trembled slightly, and he set down the cleaning rod. 20 years hadn't dulled those memories. Couldn't dull the image of Blackjack Harper's face. Younger then, unmarked by the scar James's bullet had left. The sound of Harper's brother hitting the dirt, dead before his body finished falling. "Should have killed you too," James whispered to the empty room. "Would have saved a lot of good people, a lot of pain." A knock at his door startled him from his reverie. Sarah Morrison stood on his porch, her face pale in the lamplight. At 40, she was the closest thing to a friend he had in the valley, one of the few who'd shown kindness to the quiet stranger who'd bought the old Peterson place. "Evening, Sarah." He stepped aside, letting her enter. "Heard about Tommy. I'm powerful sorry. They killed my boy James." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she clutched her shawl. "Shot him in the back while he was trying to protect our horses." Blackjack Harper stood there laughing while he died. James's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. "Sheriff's putting together a posse. Sheriff Mills is a good man, but he's no match for Harper's." "King," she met his gaze directly. "You know what they say about you in town? The whispers about who you really are? People talk. Most of what they say ain't true. Some of it is." She reached into her shawl, pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline screamed about a shootout in Laramie 20 years ago. A sketch showed a younger James Hawkins standing over 7 dead men, guns still smoking. His jaw tightened. "Where'd you get that?" "My father was marshal in Laramie back then. He saw what you did, said it wasn't just skill, said it was like watching death itself walk the earth." She laid the clipping on his table. Said they called you Death's Shadow because you never left survivors. Because you could kill a man before he knew you were there. James stared at the old paper, at the face of a man he'd tried so hard to leave behind. That man's dead, Sarah. Died a long time ago. No. She stood, straightening her shawl. He's sitting right here, pretending to be a rancher, and my boy's blood is crying out for him. She moved to the door, paused. Harper's gang will hit your place soon. When they do, I'm begging you, show them why men used to whisper your name like a prayer. After she left, James sat for a long time, staring at the newspaper. The memories flooded back. The weight of his gun belt, the smell of powder, the way men's eyes widened when they realized who they were facing, the terrible, perfect clarity that came in those split seconds between draw and fire. He'd killed his first man at 16. By 20, his reputation was spreading like wildfire. By 30, mere whispers of his presence could empty towns. They said he could shoot a man's gun hand without drawing blood, said he could put a bullet through a wedding ring at 50 paces, said he could kill you yesterday and make you realize it tomorrow. Most of those stories were exaggerated. Some weren't. Standing slowly, James walked to his barn. The loose board came away easily, revealing the oiled cloth bundle within. His hands remembered the weight of his custom Colt, the perfect balance of it. The pearl grip still bore the notches. Nay, 97 of them, each representing a life ended by his hand. "Hello, old friend," he whispered, running his finger along the silver inlays. In the dim barn, the metal seemed to drink in what little light there was, as hungry for blood as it had ever been. He'd sworn never to wear it again, sworn on his wife's grave that the killing was done. But as he stood there, holding 20 years of violence in his hands, he knew Sarah was right. Death's shadow wasn't dead. He'd just been sleeping, waiting for the world to remind him why he'd become what he was. Black Jack Harper was coming, and this time one of them wouldn't walk away. The next morning brought rain, turning the Montana earth dark and treacherous. James rode his property line, noting fresh hoofprints in the mud. Too many for casual travelers, too careful in their spacing for honest men. His ranch hands, Tom and Bill Curtis, rode with him, their rifles across their saddles. "Someone's been watching the place," Tom said, pointing to cigarette butts near a vantage point overlooking the ranch. "Reckon they've been here more than once." James dismounted, examining the ground, with eyes trained by decades of tracking men who didn't want to be found. 3 riders. One favors his left leg. Horses' tracks are deeper on that side. They've been here at least twice in the past day. Bill whistled low. "You got damn sharp eyes for a rancher, Mr. Hawkins." James ignored the implied question, remounting his horse. He'd hired the Curtis brothers 6 months ago, good men who asked few questions. Now he saw them watching him with new eyes, probably remembering the rumors that circulated in town. Smoke rose from a neighboring valley, where the Morrison Ranch was still burying their dead. The gang's message was clear: resist and face the consequences. 3 more farms had been hit since Tommy Morrison's death, each raid bigger and bolder than the last. "Mr. Hawkins!" Young Deputy Williams rode hard toward them, his horse lathered with sweat. "Sheriff sent me. Harper's gang hit the Wilson place last night, took everything, burned what they couldn't carry." Casualties. James's voice was flat, emotionless. "No, sir. Wilsons were in town, but—" The deputy hesitated. "They left a message. For you." James's hand tightened on his reins. "What kind of message?" "Carved it into the Wilsons' barn door. Said Death's shadow can't hide forever." The deputy's eyes were wide. "Sir, what did they mean by that?" Before James could answer, Tom Curtis pointed toward the eastern ridge. "Riders coming, moving fast." 5 men appeared on the horizon, pushing their horses hard. Even at this distance, James recognized Sheriff Mills's distinctive white hat. Something was wrong. The sheriff never rode this recklessly unless trouble was breathing down his neck. "Get back to the ranch," James ordered his hands. "Arm yourselves. Deputy, ride with them." "But, sir, do it." There was something in James's voice that brooked no argument, a tone of command that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere authority. The sheriff's party reached them just as the others disappeared around the bend. Mills's horse was bleeding from a graze on its flank, and one of his men had a crude bandage around his arm. "Harper's coming!" Mills gasped out. "Whole gang! They hit 3 farms this morning, working their way up the valley, killing anyone who resists." He looked at James with desperate eyes. "They're not even trying to hide anymore, just riding straight in, daring anyone to stop them." James studied the horizon, calculating distances and times. "How many?" 35, maybe 40. Got some new men, real hard cases. "They're—" Mills hesitated. "They're asking for you by name, James. By your old name." A cold wind swept across the valley, carrying the smell of rain and gun smoke. James could feel it coming, the familiar tension in his bones, the clarity of mind that preceded violence. Like his body, remembering what his conscience wanted to forget. How long? Few hours, maybe less. We're trying to organize resistance, but people are scared. Harper's got them terrified. James turned his horse toward the ranch, his movement suddenly different. Gone was the careful pace of an aging rancher. In its place was something else, something predatory, smooth as flowing water and twice as deadly. "Get your family out, Sheriff. Get everyone out of the valley who'll go." His voice had changed too, becoming softer, more precise, the voice that had whispered death to 97 men. "I'll handle Harper." "Damn it, James, you can't take them alone. This isn't 20 years ago. You're not—" "I'm exactly what I've always been." James looked back, and Mills fell silent at what he saw in those steel-gray eyes. "I just forgot it for a while." As he rode back to his ranch, James could feel the years falling away. Every hoofbeat brought back memories of other rides, other fights. The weight of his work pistol felt wrong now, too light, too ordinary. In his mind, he could feel the perfect balance of his custom Colt, waiting in the barn like a faithful dog, anticipating its master's return. Black Jack Harper wanted to wake Death's shadow, wanted to remind him of who he really was. James Hawkins allowed himself a small, cold smile. Harper was about to learn why some legends are best left sleeping. Thunder rolled across the valley as James reached his ranch. Tom and Bill Curtis had already barricaded the barn doors, their rifles glinting in the dim light. Deputy Williams paced nervously, his hand never far from his gun. The sound came without warning, a single gunshot echoing from the south, then another, then a whole chorus of them punctuated by distant screams. "That's the Whitaker place," Tom said grimly. "They're starting with the smaller farms." James stood motionless, listening. His trained ear picked out different guns, Winchester rifles, Colt revolvers, even the distinctive boom of a shotgun. But underneath it all was another sound, the terrified screams of children. "Mount up," he ordered, already moving toward the stable. "Mr. Hawkins," Bill protested, "you can't mean to— the Whitakers have 3 young ones." James's voice could have frozen hell itself. "I won't sit here and listen to them die." They rode hard through the rain, 4 men against what they knew would be overwhelming odds. James led them along a creek bed, using the terrain to mask their approach. As they drew closer, thick black smoke stained the sky. The Whitakers' barn was burning. From their position behind a low ridge, they could see it all. The gang had the family cornered on their porch, John Whitaker bleeding from a head wound, his wife shielding their children with her body. Black Jack Harper sat his horse in the yard, a cigarette hanging from his lips beneath his scarred face. "Last chance, Whitaker," Harper called out. "Tell me where Death's shadow lares up, and maybe your kids get to grow up without a father instead of not growing up at all." James felt something shift inside him, like a lock turning, like a beast unchained. His hands moved without conscious thought, unbuttoning his duster. "Mr. Hawkins," Deputy Williams whispered. "What are you?" The words died in his throat as James shrugged off his coat. Underneath, worn over his plain shirt, was a gun belt that hadn't seen sunlight in 20 years. The custom Colt gleamed darkly in its holster, its pearl grip yellowed with age, but its barrel bright with fresh oil. "Stay here," James commanded softly. "Whatever happens, don't interfere." His voice had changed completely now, soft as falling snow and twice as cold. "This is between me and them." Before anyone could stop him, he stepped out from behind the ridge. His spurs rang with each step as he walked into the yard, drawing every eye. For a moment there was total silence, broken only by the crackle of flames and the terrified whimpers of children. "Black Jack," James called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Still shooting unarmed men and frightening children? Some things never change." Harper spun in his saddle, his face going pale beneath his weather-beaten tan. For a moment, he looked like that young gun from 20 years ago, watching his brother die in a Laramie street. "Well," Harper said, trying to hide his shock with a bravado, "the shadow finally shows himself. Boys, looks like Christmas came early," but his men weren't sharing his enthusiasm. They'd heard the stories, seen the newspaper clippings. More importantly, they could feel it, the deadly calm radiating from the grey-haired man who stood so casually before them. "Let the family go," James said quietly. "Ride away. Pretend you never found what you were looking for. That's your one chance at living through this day." Harper drew his gun, faster than any man had right to be. "I've waited 20 years to prove I'm quicker than the famous Death's Shadow. Time to see if the legend dies like any other man." The explosion of Harper's gun was deafening, but James Hawkins wasn't there anymore. He'd moved, drawing and firing in one liquid motion, so fast the eye could barely follow. Harper's gun went spinning away, along with 3 of his fingers. His scream of pain and rage shattered the tableau, and all hell broke loose. Time slowed to a crawl as gunfire erupted across the Whitaker farm. James moved like liquid death, each motion precise and economical. 2 bandits fell before they could level their rifles. A third died trying to circle behind him. His custom, Colt sang a song of lead and gunsmoke, each shot finding its mark with surgical precision. "Kill him!" Harper screamed, cradling his mangled hand. $1,000 to the man who brings me his head." The gang's initial shock gave way to desperate fury. Bullets churned the mud around James's feet, but none found their mark. He seemed to flow between the shots, his return fire devastating. 5 men down, 8, 12. From their position behind the ridge, Deputy Williams watched in awe. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. The stories weren't exaggerated, they were understated. The remaining bandits broke, spurring their horses hard. Harper among them, leaving half his gang dead or dying in the blood-soaked yard. James stood motionless, his gun still smoking, watching them flee. "Mr. Hawkins?" John Whitaker's voice shook as he helped his family up. We... "Get your family to town." James cut him off, his voice still carrying that deadly softness. "Harper will be back, with more men." The Curtis brothers emerged from their cover, rifles ready but unneeded. They stared at the carnage, 14 men down, each shot with deadly precision. None had even come close to hitting James. "You really are him," Deputy Williams said, his young face pale. "Death's Shadow, the stories my pa used to tell, about the man who could outdraw lightning." James ignored him, kneeling to check one of the bodies. He found what he was looking for, a folded paper with crude maps of every ranch in the valley, notes about defenses, daily routines, weapons. "They've been planning this for months," he said quietly, "using the raids as cover to scout everything. Harper's not just seeking revenge, he's trying to take the whole valley." Thunder rolled overhead as rain began to fall again, washing blood into the dark earth. James stood, his movement suddenly showing every one of his 62 years. You should leave too, he told his hands. What's coming? It's not something honest men should be part of. Tom Curtis stepped forward, chambering a round in his Winchester. Due respect, Mr. Hawkins, but we don't run. Valley's our home too. Besides, Bill added with a grim smile, way I see it, we're working for Death's shadow himself. Be damn foolish to quit now. James studied them for a long moment, seeing the determination in their eyes. Finally, he nodded. Your choice. But understand, from here on out, there's no middle ground. Harper will come with everything he has, and I'm going to kill them all. How many in his full gang? Williams asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 35, counting the ones who just left. James began reloading his Colt, each motion practiced and precise. He'll send riders to other gangs, call in favors, probably double that number. Within 2 days, 70 men. Williams went pale. Even you can't. Son. James's voice was soft but carried an edge, sharp as a razor. There's a reason they called me Death's Shadow. By the time I'm done, every man who rode with Harper will wish they'd never heard of this valley. He turned toward his horse, but Williams grabbed his arm. Wait, what? What should I tell the sheriff? James gently but firmly removed the deputy's hand. Tell him to keep everyone out of the Northern Valley. Tell him what's coming isn't law enforcement's business. This is between me and them now. But they rode back through the rain. James could feel it, the familiar cold clarity settling into his bones. 20 years of peace stripped away like morning mist, revealing the killer beneath. Death's shadow was awake, and he was hungry. Evening shadows stretched long across James's ranch as he made his preparations. The Curtis brothers watched in silent awe as he transformed the peaceful farm into a killing ground, each decision backed by decades of lethal experience. Cattle. To the south pasture, he ordered, checking sightlines from the barn's upper window. They'll try to steal them first, test our defenses. We'll let them get close, then take the high ground here. He pointed to a rocky outcropping. Tom, that's your position. Winchester can cover the whole approach. What about the house? Bill asked, noting how James had moved furniture to create protective positions. Last resort. We'll engage them from the outbuildings first. James ran his hand along a roof beam. If they force us inside, that's when it gets interesting. A rider appeared on the horizon. Deputy Williams, returning from town. The young lawman's face was grim as he dismounted. Harper's. Gathering men, he reported. Sent riders to every outlaw gang within 100 miles. Offering gold and a chance to say they helped bring down Death's shadow. James nodded, unsurprised. Numbers? 30 riders spotted heading this way already. More coming. Word spreading fast. Williams hesitated. There's something else. Some of these men, they're not just bandits. Gunfighters, professionals, men looking to make their reputation by killing a legend. A thin smile crossed James's weathered face. Won't be the first time. Won't be the last. He turned to his hands. Check the back rifle positions. I want clear fields of fire on every approach. As the brothers moved off, Williams studied the legendary Gunslinger. Mr. Hawkins, my pa used to tell stories about you. Said you once took down 15 men in Dodge City without reloading. Said you could shoot a man's gun from his hand at 50 paces. Your pa talk about the price. James's voice was soft. About the weight of those 97 notches? About the nightmares that never quite fade? No, sir, just the legend. That's the problem with legends, son. People remember the glory, forget the blood. James drew his Colt in one fluid motion, so fast Williams didn't even see his hand move. Every notch on this gun is a life. Every life was somebody's son, somebody's brother. Glory's got nothing to do with it. A shot rang out from the north pasture, then another. Tom Curtis's voice carried across the yard. Riders coming! Look like scouts! James moved to the barn door, his movement suddenly different, predatory, focused. Through his spyglass, he counted 4 men approaching carefully, testing for resistance. "Stay here," he told Williams. "Whatever happens, don't interfere." Before the deputy could respond, James seemed to vanish. There one moment, gone the next. Williams blinked, amazed at how a man his age could move so silently. The scouts were good, professionals keeping to cover and watching each other's backs. But they were hunting a shadow, and shadows own the dusk. The first man never knew what hit him. One moment he was scanning the tree line, the next he was unconscious, dragged silently into the brush. The second noticed his partner missing and raised his rifle, only to have it plucked from his hands by a ghost. The third and fourth spotted movement and opened fire, their shots kicking up dirt where James had been a split second before. Their accuracy was impressive. Their speed was exceptional. It wasn't nearly enough. James appeared behind them like death itself, his movements a blur. The third man's gun went flying, along with 2 of his teeth. The fourth managed to turn, squeezing off a shot that would have killed any normal man. But Death's shadow wasn't normal. He flowed around the bullet like water around a stone, his Colt seemingly materializing in his hand. One shot took the man's gun, a second his hat, and a third neatly clipped his ear. "Message for Blackjack," James said softly to the terrified scout. "Tell him I'm ready. Tell him I remember everything. Tell him Death's shadow is waiting." Williams watched from the barn as the scouts fled, 2 of them helping their unconscious companions. He'd never seen anything like it. One man disarming and disabling 4 professional gunmen without killing any of them. "Jesus," he whispered as James returned. "You were playing with them?" "No." James's voice was cold. "Sending a message. Those men were good. Harper will know that. Know what it means that I took them apart so easily." "What does it mean?" James checked his Colt, his movements precise. "Means he'll come with everything he has. Every killer, every gunslinger, every hard case. He can hire." A thin smile crossed his face. "Means we're about to find out if 70 men are enough to kill a shadow." Thunder rolled across the valley as darkness fell. The first stars were appearing, glinting like bullets in the dying light. The storm was gathering, and Death's shadow was ready to show the world why some legends are written in blood. Night settled over the ranch as James sat in his kitchen, carefully maintaining his Colt by lamplight. Each motion was a ritual, practiced thousands of times over decades of violence. The pearl grip gleamed softly, its 97 notches casting tiny shadows. A knock at the door brought his gun up smoothly. "It's Williams," the deputy's voice called out. James lowered the Colt but didn't put it away. The young lawman entered, carrying a thick file. "Sheriff sent this over. Thought you should see what we're facing." The file contained wanted posters, newspaper clippings, telegrams from other jurisdictions. James spread them across his table, studying faces he hadn't seen in 20 years. Jake Quickdraw McGrath. Williams pointed to one poster. "Killed 12 men in Texas last year, coming up from the south with 10 riders." He moved to another. "Samuel Cross, the Oklahoma kid. Has his own gang, 15 men. Word is, they're a day's ride out." "I know them," James said softly. "Young, guns looking to make their name." His finger traced another poster. "This one's different. Marcus Clay. He's old school, dangerous, one of the few who could give me trouble 20 years ago." "How many men that good are coming?" 5 or 6. "Real killers, not just thugs with guns." James's voice carried neither fear nor bravado, just cold certainty. "Harper spent 20 years planning this. Called in every favor, every debt. He wants to make sure." "Make sure of what?" "That Death's shadow dies for real this time." James picked up an old newspaper clipping, the story of a shootout in Laramie 2 decades ago. "You want to know why Harper hates me so much? Why he's gathered an army just to kill one old man?" Williams nodded, settling into a chair. 20 years ago, Harper and his brother were making a name for themselves, killing for sport, torturing for fun. They hit a settlement up near Laramie, found a family, mother, father, 3 young girls. James's voice grew softer, more dangerous. Harper's brother decided to have some fun, made the parents watch while he stopped, his hand tightening on his gun. I was tracking them. Got there too late for the family. Found Harper's brother still there, still laughing about it. What did you do? Put a bullet through each hand, one through each knee. Wanted him to have time to think about what he'd done before the last shot. James's eyes were distant, remembering. Harper showed up just in time to watch his brother die. Tried to draw on me, put a bullet through his face, gave him that scar he still carries. Jesus, Williams whispered, should have killed him too. But I wanted him to live with it, live with knowing his brother died slowly, died afraid. James checked his gun's action. Been hunting me ever since. 20 years of planning, gathering. Men building his reputation, all for revenge. Movement outside caught their attention. Tom Curtis appeared in the doorway, rifle ready. Riders approaching from the north, just watching for now. James moved to the window. Through his spyglass, he counted at least 20 men in the moonlight. More shadows moved on the ridgeline. They're probing our defenses, he said quietly, testing our response. A shot rang out, the bullet thudding into the doorframe, and checking my reflexes. Without seeming to move, James's Colt appeared in his hand. The return shot was a blur, faster than human eyes could follow. A cry of pain and surprise came from the darkness, followed by the clatter of a falling rifle. 200 yards in moonlight, Williams breathed. That's impossible. No. James's voice was cold. That's what Harper's forgotten. Why they called. Me death's shadow. Another shot from the darkness. Another blur of motion, another cry of pain. Because in the dark, distance doesn't matter, because you can't hide from a shadow. More riders were appearing now, their numbers growing as scattered groups joined the main force. Horses stamped and snorted in the darkness. Metal clinked against metal. Has to be 40 men out there already, Tom reported. More coming. James nodded, his expression unchanged. Harper's keeping the real killers back, sending common thugs first. Wear us down. He checked his ammunition. Smart. Won't work. But smart. Why won't it work? Williams asked. A thin, deadly smile crossed James's face. Because tomorrow I'm going to remind them why men used to wet themselves at whispers of my name. Going to show them what Death's shadow really means. He turned to Tom. Get some rest. Tomorrow we paint the valley red. As his men settled in, for the night, James Hawkins stood at his window, watching the gathering forces. Somewhere out there, Blackjack Harper was waiting, dreaming of revenge. Tomorrow would show him that some dreams turn into nightmares, and some legends are written in blood for a reason. Dawn broke blood red over the valley, painting the gathered outlaws in crimson light. James counted over 50 men now, their camps scattered across the ridgeline. More arriving by the hour, drawn by gold and the chance at immortal reputation. They're moving, Tom Curtis called softly from his position. Looks like 20 men coming down the east slope. James watched through his spyglass as riders formed into loose groups. Not Harper's professionals yet. These were common bandits sent to test his defenses, still dangerous but undisciplined. Remember, he told his men, let them get close. Make them think they have a chance. The riders approached cautiously first then with growing confidence as no resistance met them. Their leader, a burly man with a scraggly beard, raised his hand to signal the advance. James's first shot took that hand clean off. Chaos erupted as the outlaws realized their mistake. They'd crossed an invisible line, entered Death's shadow's killing ground. James seemed to materialize from nowhere, his Colt blazing with supernatural speed. 4 men fell before they could level their weapons. 3 more died trying to return. Fire! The Curtis brothers added their rifles to the slaughter, their aim precise and deadly. "Fall back," someone screamed. "He's behind us." But James wasn't behind them. He was everywhere. Decades of experience had taught him how to use terrain, how to appear and disappear like the shadow he was named for. His gun never seemed to need reloading, death flowing from its barrel in a continuous stream. A group of riders tried to circle wide, thinking to flank him. They found Deputy Williams waiting, his shotgun turning their charge into bloody chaos. Another bunch made for the barn, only to meet Tom Curtis's rifle fire. "Demon!" A Mexican bandit crossed himself before a bullet took his gun hand. "El Diablo!" In less than 5 minutes, it was over. 15 men lay dead or wounded in the blood-soaked grass. The survivors fled in blind panic, leaving their fallen comrades behind. James reloaded calmly, each motion precise. He hadn't even drawn a heavy breath. "Sweet Jesus," Williams whispered, approaching carefully. "I counted 12 men. You got 12 men with 13 shots. That's not possible." "Possible enough." James surveyed the carnage with cold eyes. "Harper will send his real killers next. These were just cannon fodder." As if summoned by his words, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. Even at this distance, James recognized the scarred face of Blackjack Harper. "Shadow," Harper's voice carried across the valley. "Nice to see you haven't lost your touch, but those were just boys. Wait till you meet the men I've brought." James's response was a single shot that knocked Harper's hat off, neatly trimming a lock of his hair. "That was a warning, Jack," James called back, his soft voice somehow carrying clearly. "Next time I take the rest of your face." Harper's laugh was ugly. "Still showing off, but I've got 70 men now, Shadow. Killers, gunfighters, professionals. How many bullets in that famous gun of yours?" "Enough." James's voice could have frozen hell itself. "Come ahead with your army, Jack. Come see why they name me Death's Shadow. Come learn why grown men still wake screaming at the memory of my name. You're not what you were. 20 years is a long time. You've got 3 men, and that badge-wearing boy. I've got the deadliest gunman in the territory." James's next shot kicked up dirt precisely between Harper's horse's front hooves, making the animal rear in panic. "Numbers don't matter in the dark, Jack, and it's always dark in a shadow." Harper wheeled his horse, but his voice drifted back. "Sunset, Shadow. We come at sunset. Hope you've made peace with your maker." As the outlaw leader disappeared, Williams turned to James. "He's right about one thing, sir. There's a lot of them. Numbers don't win gunfights, son. Skill does. Speed does." James checked his Colt's action. "And there's something else Harper's forgotten." "What's that?" A cold smile touched James's lips. "Why they didn't call me the fastest gun or the deadliest shot. Why they called me Death's Shadow." He turned to survey his killing ground. "Already planning. Because you can't kill a shadow, can't outrun it, can't hide from it, can't stop it." His voice dropped softer, colder. "By sunset tomorrow, Harper and his men will understand. They'll learn why some legends are best left alone, why some reputations are earned in blood." Thunder rolled in the distance as storm clouds gathered. James Hawkins, the man they called Death's Shadow, prepared to remind the world why his name had once made empires tremble. Noon brought a lull in the fighting as both sides prepared for the coming storm. James sat cleaning his Colt when Sarah Morrison rode in hard, her horse lathered with sweat. "They're not just here for you," she gasped out, throwing a bundle of papers on his table. "Harper's working for someone with money, with power." James spread out the documents, land deeds, mining claims, railroad surveys. His eyes narrowed as he studied them. "Where did you get these? My father wasn't just marshal in Laramie." Sarah's hands trembled slightly. "He was investigating something bigger, something that got him killed 3 months ago." James's head snapped. "Up. Killed. Made to look like a robbery, but he'd sent me these first." She pointed to a map. "There's silver in these hills, James. More than anyone knows. The railroad's coming through next year. Someone's been buying up land, using Harper's gang to force people out." "Who?" Judge Matthews in Helena, he's been quietly acquiring properties all through the territory, using Harper to clear out any ranchers who won't sell. The Curtis brothers exchanged looks. That explains the pattern, Tom said. They haven't been hitting random farms. They've been targeting specific properties. James studied the map, his tactical mind seeing the bigger picture. The valley's a natural route for the railroad. Control the land here, control the whole territory. He looked at Sarah. How many judges? 3, plus 2 senators and a railroad baron. They've been planning this for years. She met his eyes. That's why they sent Harper. They knew your reputation, knew you might be the only one who could stop them. Williams whistled low. Sweet Jesus, we're not just fighting outlaws. We're fighting the territory government itself. Makes no difference. James's voice was ice. Judge's blood spills just as red as a bandit's. They'll send more than just Harper's men, Sarah warned. Once they realize you know, they'll send everyone they can buy. Pinkertons, professional killers, whole armies of hired guns. A thin smile touched James's lips. Good. Save me the trouble of hunting them down. James. Sarah's voice softened. My father died trying to expose this. These men, they control everything. Courts, lawmen, newspapers. They can bury the truth, make anyone disappear. They can try. James checked his gun's action. But first they have to get past me, past Death's shadow. A rider appeared on the ridge, one of Harper's men holding a white flag. James nodded to Tom, who covered him as he walked out to meet the messenger. Harper wants to talk, the man said nervously, clearly terrified to be so close to the legendary gunslinger. Says he's got a message from Judge Matthews himself. When? Hour before sunset. Neutral ground, middle of the valley, just you and him. James studied the messenger. Young, scared, probably didn't know what he was really involved in. Tell Harper I'll be there. Tell him to be ready to discuss Judge Matthews and the silver and the railroad. The boy's face went pale. I don't know what you're... Yes, you do. Now ride back and give Harper my message. Word for word. As the messenger galloped away, Williams approached. You're not really going to meet him, are you? It's obviously a trap. Of course it is. James turned back to the ranch. Harper's probably got a dozen sharpshooters setting up right now, getting ready to turn that meeting ground into a killing field. Then why? Because now they know that I know. Know about the silver, the judges, all of it. His voice went softer, deadlier, and that means they have to come for me. Have to throw everything they have at me before I can expose them. Sarah grabbed his arm. That's suicide, James. They'll send hundreds of men, professional killers, whole armies. No. His eyes held a cold fire that made her step back. That's justice. Your father died trying to expose them from the shadows. I'll do it in the open. Paint the truth in blood across this valley where no one can ignore it. Thunder rolled closer as storm clouds built over the mountains. James Hawkins, the man they called Death's Shadow, prepared to take on not just Harper's killers, but the corrupt power behind them. Get ready, he told his small band. By sunset, we'll be fighting not just for this valley, but for the whole, a territory, and I mean to show these corrupt judges exactly why they should fear the dark. Sarah watched him walk away, remembering her father's words about this man, about how Death's Shadow wasn't just a gunfighter. He was vengeance itself, justice in human form. The storm was gathering, and in its shadow, legends would be written in blood. With an hour left before the meeting, James stood in his barn, making final preparations. His custom Colt gleamed darkly as he loaded fresh rounds, each bullet placed with ritualistic precision. "Riders coming," Tom called from outside. "Looks like the sheriff. Got about 10 men with him." James didn't look up from his work. More than 10. Resta hanging back, trying to circle wide. Mills brought his whole force. Sheriff Mills entered the barn alone, his face grave. "James, got word from Helena this morning. Judge Matthews himself signed the order. Says you're to be arrested for murder. Those men you killed, they're calling them innocent settlers. Course, they are. James's voice was soft, dangerous. Same way they called Sarah's father's death a robbery. Same way they'll call what's coming here a legal peacekeeping action. James, please. Mills removed his hat. I've got 20 deputies out there. Judge sent 30 more lawmen from Helena. They'll be here by sunset, plus Harper's men. He swallowed hard. There's no winning this fight, not even for Death's shadow. James finally looked up, and something in his eyes made the sheriff step back. You read those papers Sarah brought? About the silver? About how your law-loving judges have been using Harper's gang to murder innocent families. I saw them. But James, they control everything. Courts, government, newspapers. Even if we exposed it, I'm not looking to expose anything, Mills. James's voice could have frozen fire. I'm going to kill them all. Every corrupt judge, every bought lawman, every hired killer. Paint this valley red with their blood until the truth can't be buried. That's insanity. You're talking about taking on the whole territory government. No. James slid his Colt into its holster with practiced grace. I'm talking about justice. Real justice, not the kind they sell in Helena courtrooms. Movement outside caught their attention. Deputy Williams burst in, his young face excited. Sir, you need to see this. They stepped out to find the valley transformed. Riders were appearing on every ridge, not Harper's men, but local ranchers, farmers, townspeople. Each one armed, each one grim-faced and determined. Sarah Morrison rode at their head, rifle across her saddle. They killed my father, she called, out. Killed my son, killed dozens of innocent people. Time someone stood up to them. James counted quickly, over 60 riders, with more arriving. Not gunfighters or trained killers, but people fighting for their homes, their lives. This isn't your fight, he said quietly. Like hell it ain't. John Whitaker pushed forward, his face still bandaged from Harper's attack. These bastards tried to murder my family, burned my barn, shot my neighbors. Way I figure, man stands up to that. Least we can do is stand with him. Mills looked around, seeing the determination in every face. You realize what this means, standing against the territorial government. They'll call it insurrection, send the army if they have to. Let them! Sarah's voice rang with steel. Let them try to bury the truth under more lies. This time we fight back. James studied the gathered farmers and ranchers, seeing not just anger but resolve. These weren't men looking for glory or revenge. They were fighting for something bigger, for justice, for their homes, for the truth. You'll need a leader, Mills said finally, making his decision. He turned to his deputies. Any man who wants to enforce Judge Matthews's corrupt orders, ride. Out now, rest of you. We've got a valley to defend. Not a single deputy left. James checked the sun, 30 minutes until his meeting with Harper. Storm clouds gathered overhead, promising violence to match what was coming. Harper's got 70 killers, he told the gathered crowd. Judge Matthews is sending 30 more, plus whatever other guns they can buy. Won't be a clean fight. Won't be a fair one? Ain't looking for fair, Tom Curtis called out. Looking for right. Thunder rolled across the valley as James Hawkins, the man they called Death's Shadow, faced his impromptu army. Not professional gunmen or hired killers, but people pushed too far. People who'd finally had enough. Then let's show these corrupt judges what happens when they push honest folks too far. His voice carried like winter wind across the gathering. Let's remind them why they should fear the dark, why they should fear the shadow. A cheer went up, echoing off the mountains. The storm was about to break, and with it would come violence such as the territory had never seen. Death's Shadow was no longer alone, and the legend about to be written would be penned in blood. The meeting ground was a flat stretch of grassland, halfway between James's ranch and Harper's forces. Storm clouds roiled overhead as James walked out alone, his spurs ringing with each measured step. The gathered ranchers and lawmen watched. From a distance, weapons ready. Harper approached from the other direction, his scarred face twisted in an ugly smile. Behind him, his army of killers lined the ridgeline. "Brought some friends, I see," Harper called out, stopping 20 paces. "Away! Brave of them. Stupid, but brave. Figured out who you're really working for, Jack." James's voice was soft as falling snow. "Judge Matthews, the silver mines, the railroad. You're just a dog on their leash." Harper's smile widened. "Oh, Shadow, you have no idea what's really happening here." He raised his hand, and movement exploded across the valley. From every direction, riders appeared. Not just outlaws and hired guns, but uniformed men. Army uniforms, at least 100 of them, emerging from hidden positions with military precision. "Meet Captain Reynolds," Harper gestured as a blue-coated officer rode forward. "United States Army, here with official orders from Governor Stevens himself." James didn't move, didn't show surprise, but his mind was racing, recalculating odds. "This valley's been declared in rebellion," Captain Reynolds announced, his voice carrying across the grassland. "Senator Burke himself signed the orders. Any armed resistance will be considered insurrection against the United States government." A cold smile touched James's lips. "How much did they pay you, Captain? How much to turn the U.S. Army into Judge Matthews' private killers?" "Careful, old man." Reynolds' hand moved to his saber. "That's seditious talk." "It's the truth." James's voice could have frozen hell itself. "Just like the truth about the silver, about the murders, about how deep this corruption really goes." "Enough," Harper barked. "You're surrounded, Shadow. 100 trained soldiers plus my men. Even you can't kill that many." James's laugh was soft, deadly. "That's what you never understood, Jack. Never understood why they called me Deaths. Shadow." His hand moved to his Colt, not drawing but ready. "Because a shadow doesn't need to kill everyone, just the right ones." His gun cleared leather with supernatural speed. The shot was impossible. 100 yards to where Judge Matthews himself sat on horseback behind the army lines, hidden until... Now! The judge's head snapped back, a bullet hole precise between his eyes. Chaos erupted. Soldiers raised rifles. Harper went for his gun. But James was already moving, becoming the ghost that had made his legend. "Kill him!" Harper screamed. "Kill them all!" But another sound rose above the chaos. Thunder. Not from the storm, but from hooves. Hundreds of hooves. Over the ridge behind James's position, riders appeared. Leading them was a face Harper hadn't seen in 20 years. U.S. Marshal Daniel Cole, the man who'd trained James, who'd given him the name Death's Shadow. "Those aren't legal orders, Captain Reynolds." Cole's voice boomed across the valley. "But these are." He held up papers bearing the presidential seal. "Signed by President Grant himself. You're all under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and murder." Behind Cole rode 200 U.S. Marshals, all with rifles ready. The trap James had set was finally sprung. "You didn't think I spent 20 years just farming, did you, Jack?" James's voice carried clearly through the chaos. "Been building this case, gathering evidence, waiting for you to lead me to the ones really responsible." Harper's face contorted with rage and fear as he realized the truth. Death's Shadow hadn't been hiding all these years. He'd been hunting. The valley erupted into chaos as Captain Reynolds tried to maintain control of his troops. "These orders could be forged. Hold your positions." "Look closer, Captain." Marshal Cole rode forward, his badge glinting. "Notice how Judge Matthews didn't. Seem surprised to see your troops here, almost like he arranged it." He tossed a leather folio to Reynolds. "Those are copies of his telegrams to you, and his payments to your accounts in Helena." Reynolds went pale as his men watched. The corruption of their mission was becoming clear. "You all have a choice," James called out, his quiet voice somehow carrying over the tension. "Follow illegal orders from corrupt men, or stand down and let justice be done." Harper's laugh was maniacal. "Justice? You're talking about justice?" He pointed at James with his remaining hand. "Tell them, Shadow. Tell them who really started." All this, tell them about my brother." "Your brother?" Sarah Morrison rode forward. "What does he mean, James?" "His brother was a U.S. Marshal," James said softly. "My partner 20 years ago, until I discovered he was working with Judge Matthews, helping arrange accidents for ranchers who wouldn't sell." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Harper's men stirred uneasily as the truth emerged. My brother was doing what needed to be done, Harper screamed. The territory needed the railroad, needed progress. A few dead farmers didn't matter. He murdered 16 families. James's voice was winter cold, including my wife and daughter, made it look like Indian raids, like accidents, until I caught him. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "That's why you retired here. Why you've been watching, waiting all these years. Been gathering evidence, building the case. Marshal Cole and I, we needed them all in one place, needed to expose how deep it went." His eyes locked onto Harper. "Your brother was just the start. Led us to Judge Matthews, to Senator Burke, to all of them." "You're lying!" Harper drew his gun, but James was faster. The shot took Harper's gun hand completely off, sending it spinning into the grass. "Just like I took your brother's hands," James said softly, "before I executed him for his crimes." Army troops began lowering their weapons as the truth became undeniable. Captain Reynolds looked sick as he read through the evidence. 20 years. Marshal Cole announced. 20 years we've been building this case, needed someone on the inside, someone they thought was no threat. A retired gunslinger turned farmer, just wanting peace. "Death's shadow never retired," James told Harper, whose face was twisted in pain and hatred. "He just learned patience, learned that some vengeance takes time, takes planning." More riders appeared, federal agents, treasury men, more marshals. The net James had spent 2 decades weaving was finally drawing tight. "Your brother died knowing what he was," James said, advancing on Harper. "Died understanding that justice comes for everyone sooner or later. Now it's your turn." "Kill him!" Harper screamed to his men. "Kill them all!" But his killers stood motionless, finally understanding what they'd walked into. This wasn't just a fight against one legendary gunman. This was the end of an empire of corruption, and Death's shadow had orchestrated every moment of it. Thunder rolled as James Hawkins, the man they called Death's Shadow, prepared to finish what he'd started 20 years ago. Justice had waited long enough. The storm was about to break. And, in its fury, 2 decades of patience would finally be rewarded. The wind picked up as storm clouds blackened the sky, nature itself seeming to sense the coming violence. Most of the army troops had withdrawn, their captain facing arrest for conspiracy. But Harper's killers remained, joined by the most dangerous elements of the corrupt regime's forces. "About 40 professional gunmen still up there," Marshal Cole reported, studying the ridge through his spyglass. "Plus whatever's left of Matthews's private army. They know they're finished if they surrender. Every one of them's got a price on his head." James checked his Colt methodically, each motion practiced and precise. "Hired killers, nothing more. Dangerous than men with nothing left to lose." Sarah Morrison approached, her rifle ready. "James, there's something else you should know." She handed him a weathered telegram. "Found this in my father's papers, the day before they killed him." James read it silently, his face hardening. "Your father was helping us, feeding information to Cole." She nodded. 20 years of evidence, records of every murder, every land grab. He died protecting that information. Her voice caught. "Just like your family died. Difference is," James's voice was soft as falling snow, "your father's killers are still alive, for now." Among Harper's remaining men, word was spreading about what they truly faced. Not just a legendary gunfighter, but 20 years of careful planning. "A trap decades in the making. We should rush them," one of Harper's lieutenants argued. "We still outnumber them." Numbers didn't help the others. A grizzled gunfighter replied. "Didn't you see what he did to Judge Matthews?" 100-yard shot. Through the eyes, faster than a rattler's strike, thunder rolled as James walked the line of defenders. Farmers, lawmen, and marshals, all preparing for what was coming. Some checked weapons with trembling hands. Others prayed quietly. "You don't have to stay," he told them. "What's coming? It won't be clean." "My boy died for this," John Whitaker said firmly, loading his shotgun. "Reckon I'll see it through." The Curtis brothers nodded agreement. "Been working for Death's Shadow all this time," Tom said. "Like to see how the legend ends." Up on the ridge, Harper was regaining control of his forces. His remaining hand clutched a rifle, his face twisted with pain and hate. "Shadow thinks he's so clever," he screamed. "Thinks his 20-year plan makes him untouchable, but he bleeds just like anyone." Marshal Cole rode up beside James, checking his own weapons. "He'll try something desperate. Too much pride to surrender, too much hate to run." "Good." James's voice carried that deadly softness. "Time to finish what I started when I killed his brother." Deputy Williams approached, his young face serious. "Sir, found something you should see." He led them to a captured wagon filled with dynamite and mining charges. They were planning to level the whole valley, destroy all the evidence. James studied the explosives with cold eyes. "Still might try it. Man like Harper, he'll want to take everyone with him." The wind grew stronger, carrying the smell of rain and gunpowder. Along the defensive line, men took their positions. This wasn't just about land anymore, or silver, or railroads. This was about justice, about 20 years of patience finally bearing fruit. "You sure about this?" Cole asked quietly. "Could just burn them out, starve them down?" "No," James checked. His gun one final time. "They killed my family, Marshal. Killed Sarah's father. Killed good people for nothing but greed." His voice grew colder. "Time they learned why they used to whisper my name in terror." Lightning split the sky as Death's Shadow prepared for his final battle. 20 years of planning, of waiting, of building his case and setting his trap. It all came down to this moment. Harper's remaining killers watched nervously as storm clouds gathered. They'd come for glory, for gold, for the chance to say they'd beaten the legendary Death's Shadow. Instead, they'd walked into judgment itself, and the sentence was about to be carried out. The first drops of rain fell as sunset approached, each one hitting the dust like a bullet. James stood at his defensive line, watching Harper's men through the growing gloom. The corrupt judge's death had split their forces, some wanting to flee, others driven mad with desperation. "Movement on the East Ridge," Tom Curtis reported quietly. "Looks like they're trying to get that dynamite up high." "Let them." James's voice was winter cold. "Desperate men make mistakes." Marshal Cole rode up, his face grim. "Just got word from our spotters. Harper's gathered his best killers, about 20 real hard cases. Rest are breaking up, trying to slip away in small groups." "How many staying?" Sarah asked, her rifle ready. 30, maybe 35, all gunfighters with prices on their heads, men with nothing left to lose. Lightning flashed, illuminating Harper's position. He'd set up behind an improvised barricade, his remaining hand clutching a rifle. Even at this distance, his hate was visible. "Last chance, Jack," James called out, his soft voice carrying clearly. "Surrender now. Face a judge's justice. Or face mine." Harper's laugh was maniacal. "You want justice, Shadow. Come and get it. But first—" He gestured, and his men dragged something forward. Someone. James's hand tightened on his gun as he recognized Deputy Williams, captured during his patrol. "Found your young friend scouting our lines," Harper screamed. "Wondering if Death's Shadow can live up to his legend. Wondering if you can save him before I put a bullet in his head." The deputy struggled against his captors, but they held him firm. A killer pressed a gun to his temple, grinning. "One shot," Harper taunted. "Even for the great Death's Shadow. 100 yards in the rain. Miss and the boy dies. Show us if the legend's real." The gathered defenders held their breath. It was an impossible shot, distance too far, light too poor, rain coming harder now. James's gun seemed to materialize in his hand. The shot was faster than thought, faster than lightning. The killer holding Williams dropped, a bullet hole precise. Between his eyes, before his body hit the ground, 2 more shots rang out. 2 more of Harper's men fell, their guns unfired. Williams dove for cover as James's 4th shot took down the last man near him. 4 shots, 4 kills, in less than 2 seconds. That answer your question, Jack? James's voice was soft as falling snow. Want to see more legends come true? Harper's remaining men stirred uneasily. They'd heard the stories about Death's shadow, about his speed, his accuracy. Now they'd seen it firsthand. "Kill him!" Harper screamed, his voice cracking. "Rush them all at once! He can't shoot everyone!" But his men hesitated. The rain was falling steadily now, and in the growing darkness, James seemed to become something else, not quite solid, not quite real. "Your brother said the same thing," James called out, "right before I killed him, right before I proved why they call me Death's Shadow." Lightning flashed again, and for just a moment everyone saw it. Saw what had made hardened killers whisper his name in terror. James Hawkins wasn't just standing there. He seemed to flow with the darkness, to merge with it. "By God," Marshal Cole whispered. "Never thought I'd see it again. The shadow walk." Sarah turned to him. "The what?" "Way he moves, way he becomes part of the darkness. Saw him do it once in Dodge City. Killed 12 men so fast they didn't have time to realize they were dead." The wind picked up, driving the rain harder. Williams made it back to their lines, shaken but unhurt. "They're gonna rush us," he gasped out. "Harper's lost his mind, gonna try to overwhelm us with numbers." James nodded, unsurprised. "Good. Saves us the trouble of hunting them down." He turned to his defenders. "Whatever happens next, stay behind cover. Let them come to us. Let them learn why some legends are written in blood." Thunder crashed as Harper's men prepared their charge. The explosion would come any moment. 30 desperate killers against one aging legend. But as the storm reached its peak, those killers began to understand, began to realize that the rain and darkness weren't hindering Death's shadow. They were welcoming him home. The storm reached its peak as Harper's men charged. 30 killers, all firing as they ran, turning the rain-soaked valley into hell itself. Lightning flashed continuously, making the scene strobe like some terrible painting come to life. James moved like his namesake, a shadow-given form flowing between bullets as if they were moving through molasses. His Colt roared with mechanical precision, each shot finding its mark despite the rain and chaos. "Keep firing," Harper screamed from behind his barricade. "He can't kill you all." But he was wrong. 3 men died before they made it 10 yards. 4 more fell trying to reach the defensive line. James's gun never seemed to need reloading, death flowing from its barrel in a continuous stream. The Curtis brothers added their rifles to the slaughter, picking off anyone who tried to flank. Marshal Cole's men maintained disciplined fire, cutting down killers with law enforcement precision. Then the dynamite started falling. Harper's men on the ridge had finally positioned their charges, sending them rolling down toward the defenders. The first explosion sent mud and bodies flying, creating chaos in the defensive line. "Fall back," Cole ordered. "Get clear of the—" James's voice cut through the storm, soft yet carrying. "Hold position." His gun blurred, taking down the men with the dynamite. "Let them come to us." A killer reached the barricade, leveling a shotgun at James. The blast should have torn him in half, but he wasn't there. Like smoke in the wind, Death's shadow had moved, his return shot taking the man through the heart. "Demon!" one of Harper's men screamed. "He ain't human!" Lightning revealed the truth of those words. James moved with impossible speed, his every shot perfect despite the rain and wind. Where other men struggled with mud and poor visibility, he seemed to thrive in the chaos. "That's right, boys," Harper called out. "He's not human. That's why we brought something special." A wagon crashed through their lines, pulled by frightened horses. In its bed, something large sat beneath a tarp. As the horses died to rifle fire, Harper's remaining men converged on it. Gatling gun, Cole breathed in horror. They've got a damn Gatling gun. The tarp came off, revealing the deadly machine. Harper himself manned it, his remaining hand tight on the crank. Let's see you dodge this, Shadow. The gun roared to life, spewing hundreds of rounds per minute. Everyone dove for cover as bullets chewed the earth to mud. Everyone except James. He walked straight into the barrage. Time seemed to slow as death's Shadow lived up to his legend. He moved between the bullets as if they were raindrops, each step precise and measured. His Colt spoke once, twice, 3 times. The men around the Gatling gun died before they could understand what they were seeing. Harper kept firing, his face a mask of desperate hate as James approached. Click. The gun was empty. Harper tried to reload one-handed, fumbling with cartridges as Death's shadow reached the wagon. 20 years, Jack. James's voice was soft as falling snow. 20 years planning this moment, watching you, waiting, just like I watched your brother die. Shoot him! Harper screamed to his remaining men. Empty everything you've got! Guns roared from every direction. James moved like liquid night, his own gun seeming to fire in every direction at once. Men died trying to aim, died trying to reload, who died trying to run. When the thunder faded, 13 more bodies lay in the mud. Harper stared in disbelief at his empty gun, then at the ghost who had destroyed his entire force. What are you? Justice. James leveled his Colt. The same justice that found your brother, that found Judge Matthews, that finds all murderers sooner or later. Wait. Harper raised his remaining hand. I can tell you everything. Names, dates, secret accounts. The whole conspiracy. Already got it all. 20 years of evidence. Your death is just closure. The shot echoed across the valley like final thunder. Black Jack Harper, the man who had started it all by killing James's family, fell dead in the mud, but it wasn't over. From the ridge came new shouts, new threats. The rest of the corrupt regime's forces were arriving. Private armies, hired killers, all the murdering scum that 20 years of corruption had bred. James reloaded calmly, his movements precise despite the rain and blood. Death's shadow wasn't finished yet. The legend still had more blood to write. The rain turned to hail as the remaining forces descended from the ridge. 50 men, at least, the last desperate remnants of Judge Matthews' corrupt empire. Leading them was Marcus Clay, the legendary gunfighter who'd once been Death's shadow's equal. Been a long time, Shadow, Clay called out, his voice carrying over the storm. 20 years since Dodge City, since we agreed to retire before one of us had to kill the other. Should have stayed retired, Marcus. James's voice was winter cold. This isn't your fight. Matthews paid gold, paid a lot of it. Clay drew his guns, 2 custom Colts, mirrors of James's own weapon. More than enough to die for. The defenders watched in awe as the 2 legends faced each other. Clay was renowned for his ability to shoot with both hands, supposedly as fast as James himself. Last chance, James said softly, for old times' sake. Clay's answer was a blur of motion, both guns seeming to fire at once. But James was already moving, his single Colt matching Clay's 2 shot for shot. The duel was like lightning made manifest. Both men fired and moved with impossible speed, their guns creating a continuous roar of thunder. Clay's men tried to intervene, but each time they died before they could fire. Magnificent, Clay laughed as he reloaded. The legend's still true, but can you keep this pace at your age? James's response was 3 shots so fast they sounded like one. Clay's right gun went spinning away, along with 2 fingers. His left gun barked once more before a bullet took it, and the hand holding it. Speed was never about youth, Marcus. James advanced through the hail. It was about certainty, about knowing exactly what you are. Clay stared at his ruined hands, then at the approaching shadow. What are you? Justice. The shot took Clay between the eyes, adding his body to the mud. But his death was a signal. The remaining killers charged en masse, firing desperately. James flowed through their bullets like smoke through a fence, his gun painting death across the valley. 10 men fell in as many seconds. A dozen more died trying to reach the defensive line. The Curtis brothers and Marshal Cole's men added their fire, turning the charge into a slaughter. "Enough!" a voice rang out. Senator Burke himself stood on the ridge, surrounded by the last of his private army. "Death's shadow, you've won. The evidence is already spreading across the territory, but you haven't won everything." He gestured, and men dragged Sarah Morrison forward, a gun to her head. "Surrender now!" Burke called out, "or she dies like her father died, like your family died." For a moment, absolute silence fell. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then James spoke, his voice carrying that deadly softness. "Sarah, you remember what I taught you?" A thin smile crossed her face. "When the shadow moves, be ready." What happened next became part of the legend. James fired once, the bullet passing so close to Sarah's head it parted her hair and took her captors. Gun handoff at the wrist. As the man screamed, she drove her elbow into his gut and dove aside. Death's shadow became a blur of motion. His gun roared with mechanical precision, each shot finding its mark despite the hail and darkness. Burke's remaining men died where they stood, their shots passing through empty air. The senator himself turned to run, only to find James somehow behind him. "Please," Burke fell to his knees. "I can pay. Name your price." "Already got what I wanted." James's voice was soft as falling snow. 20 years of evidence, every murder, every land grab, every corrupt deal, and now the last loose end. The shot echoed across the valley like final judgment. When dawn broke, 67 bodies lay in the blood-soaked mud. James stood among them, his gun still smoking, the legend of Death's shadow written anew in blood and violence. Marshal Cole approached. "Carefully. It's done. The evidence is spreading across the territory. Telegrams are already reaching Washington. The whole corrupt empire is falling." James nodded, finally allowing the weight of 20 years to show. "My family can rest now. Sarah's father, too, all of them. And Death's shadow, what happens to him?" A thin smile crossed James's weathered face. "Some legends never die, Marshal. They just wait in the darkness until they're needed again." The storm began to clear as justice settled over the valley. Death's shadow had dispensed his own brand of justice, written his legend in blood one final time, and somewhere in the darkness other corrupt men trembled, knowing that shadows hold secrets, and some legends are best left undisturbed. A month after the battle, James sat on his porch watching the sun set over his valley. The signs of violence had been washed away by spring rains, but the legend remained. Riders would detour miles to avoid the ranch where Death's shadow made his home. The corruption had been fully exposed. Senator Burke's death had broken the last seals of secrecy. Judges were facing trials, corrupt officials fleeing across borders. 20 years of patience had finally paid off. Sarah Morrison approached, leading her horse. She'd been appointed the valley's new law enforcement, her father's legacy living on through her badge. "Quiet today," she said, settling into a nearby chair. "Almost hard to believe what happened here." "Valley needed quiet," James replied softly. "Needed peace." "And Death's shadow? Does he need peace too?" James studied his custom Colt, resting as always within easy reach. 131 notches now marked its grip, each one representing justice served. "Shadow's done what he set out to do," he said finally. "Time to rest, unless the darkness needs him again." Sarah smiled. "Some folks in Helena are already getting greedy, already forgetting what happened here. Then they'll learn what others learned." His voice carried that deadly softness. "Some legends don't die. They just wait in the shadows." The Curtis brothers still worked his ranch, having seen too much to ever return to normal life. Deputy Williams had taken a marshal's badge, carrying the lesson of that blood-soaked night to other territories. "Your family would be proud," Sarah said quietly. "My father, too. Justice was done." "Justice is never done." James's hand moved to his gun with that impossible speed. "Just waiting, watching, ready to remind folks why they should fear the dark." The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the valley in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere out there, other corrupt men plotted, other killers practiced their trade. But they whispered his name with fear, remembered what happened in a Montana valley when justice took human form. Death's shadow had earned his rest, but his gun remained loaded, his skills remained sharp. After all, darkness comes every day, and in that darkness legends wait. Some say that on quiet nights you can still hear gunshots in that valley, still see a shadow moving faster than human eyes can follow, still feel the weight of justice watching, waiting. But most folks just hurry past, grateful that death's shadow is sleeping, praying he never has reason to wake again. The end.